Elara Voss stood at the helm of the flagship, the wind hammering against her face and rain stinging her skin like shards of glass. The familiar constellations she had relied on for years were swallowed whole by the swirling tempest, replaced by a chaotic dance of thunder and lightning that illuminated the turbulent clouds with a stark, ghostly light. All hands brace for impact. Elara's voice cut through the howling storm, firm despite the tremor of adrenaline surging through her veins. Around her, the crew scrambled to secure the rigging and reinforce the hull, their faces set with grim determination beneath drenched hoods and slick leathers. Yarick Thorn's ship was a few hundred meters to starboard, caught in the same maelstrom. Elara's gaze flicked to his silhouette, barely visible against the darkened sky, his tall, rugged frame leaning into the gusts as he fought to keep his vessel steady. His usual cocky grin was replaced by a grimace of concentration, the scar over his left eye gleaming wetly in the intermittent flashes of lightning. "This storm's a beast," Yarick's voice crackled over the calm, rough with static and tension. "But we'll break her if we have to." "Stay sharp," Elara replied, her fingers tightening around the worn wheel. "Scatter formation. We can't risk the whole fleet getting torn apart." The order sent ripples of anxiety through the scattered ships, but it was the only choice. The fleet began to peel away, each vessel seeking shelter in the fractured air currents, their paths twisting unpredictably through the storm's violent grasp. Communication lines sputtered and died under the tempest's assault, leaving crews isolated and vulnerable. Below deck, Mira Solin's world was a narrow corridor of flickering lights and humming machinery. The storm battered the hull with relentless fury, every shudder and creak a reminder of the fragile barrier between them and the abyss. Her slender fingers danced over controls, rerouting power to stabilize the faltering engines. Sweat mingled with rain that seeped through weakened seals, tracing cold paths down her pale skin. "Come on, old girl," Mira muttered, voice tight with urgency. "Hold together a little longer." Outside, the roar of the storm swallowed every other sound, save for the desperate calls of crew members and the occasional crack of thunder that rattled bones and hearts alike. Elara's mind raced through contingencies, the weight of responsibility heavy but steady. This was more than a test of skill, it was a crucible of endurance and will. Torin Vex stood on the deck, rain hammering his broad shoulders, muscles coiled and ready. His piercing blue eyes scanned the horizon, every sense alert for danger beyond the storm's fury. The storm had scattered them, but threats still lurked in the shifting shadow sky pirates, mercenaries, or worse. His grip tightened on the rail, a silent vow to protect his crew no matter the cost. "Keep your eyes open," Torin growled to the nearest sentry. "We're not alone out here." Farther away, Kesmarlo fought panic as her apprentice navigator's hands trembled over her instruments. The storm was a brutal teacher, and every moment stretched thin between terror and resolve. Ilara's earlier lessons echoed in her mind: trust the stars, trust yourself, but tonight, the stars were hidden, swallowed by the violent breath of the tempest. As hours dragged on, the scattered ships struggled against the storm's relentless onslaught. Some barely held together, while others vanished into the churning clouds, swallowed by the merciless sky. Each crew faced their own battles against the elements, against fear, and sometimes against the darker impulses that surfaced in isolation. Elara's thoughts returned to her crew, to the fragile alliances forged in the calm before the storm. The tempest had tested their unity, tearing at the seams of trust and camaraderie. Yet beneath the chaos, a quiet resilience stirred a stubborn spark that refused to be extinguished. In a brief lull, Elara reached for her communicator, voice steady despite the storm's fury. "Status report. everyone sound off. Static answered. Then one by one, familiar voices filtered through Yarek's gruff tone. Mira's calm determination, Torin's unwavering resolve, Lena's clear signals, and finally Kess's tentative but hopeful reply. They were battered, scattered, but alive. "We'll regroup at the eastern ridge," Elara ordered, a plan forming with the clarity born of necessity. "We're not finished yet, not by a long shot." The storm raged on, but so did the fleet, fractured but unbroken, driven by the fierce will of those who dared to chart the unknown skies. And as the clouds slowly began to thin, a new dawn hinted on the horizon, fragile and uncertain, yet filled with the promise of survival and hope. But the stormbreak had changed them all. Bonds would be tested anew, secrets would surface, and leadership would demand sacrifices yet unseen. Elara knew the road ahead was perilous, but for the first time in a long while, she felt the steady pulse of hope beneath the tempest's rage. The skies of Skyfold awaited, vast and untamed, and so did the challenges yet to come. Elara stood at the helm of the flagship, eyes scanning the roiling clouds where the enemy ships sliced through the sky like a ravenous flock of crows. The dusk bled into shades of purple and grey, punctuated by jagged flashes of lightning that illuminated the tension etched on every crew member's face. Torin Vex gripped the railing beside her, muscles taut and jaw clenched, ready to spring into action the moment the battle commenced. Yorick Thorn's figure was a stark contrast to the controlled composure of Elara. At the prow of his battered but swift airship, the wind whipped his sun-bleached hair into a wild halo. His scarred visage was set, eyes burning with a mixture of anger and reluctant resolve. The approaching flagship of Captain Riven Kale cut through the mist like a ghost of a past Yarrick had tried hard to forget. Their history was etched in every line on Yarrick's face, a bitter past of rivalry, betrayal, and hard-fought survival. As Kale's fleet drew nearer, the sharp crackle of communication lines buzzed through the ship. Lena Orris's voice was steady, though urgency crept beneath her tone. Enemy fleet closing fast. Multiple airships approaching from the northeast vector. Estimated time to engagement, less than 5 minutes. Elara nodded, her fingers tightening around the controls. She glanced at Myra Solon, who stood amid a cluster of star charts and ancient schematics sprawled across a makeshift table. Myra's pale eyes gleamed in the dim light as she traced lines on the maps. "The skyland below has dormant defense mechanisms," Myra explained. "If we can activate the ancient turbines embedded in the floating rocks, we might generate a defensive shield strong enough to repel boarding parties and heavy bombardment." Torin's deep voice cut through the room. "We'll need to hold the perimeter until that shield activates. Expect Kale's forces to target our weakest points first." Elara gave a curt nod. "All hands to battle stations. Yarrick, I need you to keep Kale distracted. Draw his attention and buy us time." Yarrick's glare was sharp but respectful. "I'll give him a fight he won't forget." The first cannon fire shattered the fragile calm, booming like thunderclaps across the skies. Fireballs arced between the battling airships, igniting wooden hulls and sending shards of splintered deck raining down. The deck shook violently beneath Ilara's feet as a salvo from Kale's flagship struck alarmingly close. Yorick's ship surged forward, weaving through enemy fire with reckless precision. His voice cracked over the comms, sharp and biting. "Kale, you're chasing ghosts. This skyland won't be yours while I breathe." Kale's voice responded, cold and unyielding. "Yorick, your loyalty is misplaced. This continent belongs to those who seize it." Their ships collided in a whirl of smoke, sparks, and the clash of steel as boarding parties exchanged brutal combat. Yarick's fist met the jaw of a mercenary, the fight a desperate dance of survival and old grudges. Meanwhile, Mira's hands flew over the controls, coaxing the ancient technology to life. The turbines hummed, a low thrumming that grew into a protective barrier enveloping the skyland in a shimmering dome. Cheers erupted from the crew, fueling their morale amidst the chaos. Torin led defensive squads, his commanding voice cutting through the din. Hold the line, protect the turbines at all costs. Elara's thoughts raced. This gambit by Kale was not just a battle for territory, but a challenge to the fragile hope they had built. Every decision, every inch of sky they held, was a step toward redemption or ruin. As the battle raged, Elara felt the weight of her past mistakes pressed down, but also the fierce determination of her crew lifting her spirit. The sky was a battlefield, but within it flew the promise of a new dawn for Skyfold. The once clear skies of Skyfold had darkened into a war-torn battlefield. Streaks of fiery cannon fire carved dangerous arcs through the shifting mists, illuminating the jagged silhouettes of rival airships that darted like shadows amid the drifting skylands. Beside her, Yarick Thorn gripped the controls with a fierce intensity, his sun-bleached hair whipped by the turbulent winds battering their battered vessel. "They're closing in fast," he growled, voice tight with tension. "Kale's fleet isn't playing for scraps. They want everything." Ilara's jaw tightened. She could feel the weight of every eye on her, every life aboard the fleet depending on her decisions. The past failures that haunted her threatened to rise, but she shoved them aside, focusing on the present with ruthless clarity. "Hold steady," she commanded, her voice cutting through the cacophony like a blade. "Prepare the star cannon storing. Get your team ready for boarding defense." "Myra, how's the engine?" Below deck, the hum of ancient machinery flickered uncertainly, the strain of battle taxing every system. Myra Solan's slender fingers moved deftly over a tangle of wires and glowing runes etched into the ship's core. "We're holding, but the damage is spreading. I'll need time to reroute power." Time was a luxury they did not have. Above, the enemy fleet surged forward like a swarm, led by the imposing figure of Captain Riven Kale. His cold grey eyes gleamed with ruthless purpose as his mechanical arm clenched around the controls of his flagship. His forces pressed the attack with brutal precision, intent on crushing any resistance. Explosions rocked the air as cannonballs slammed into the hulls of the expedition's ships. The sky was alive with the roar of engines, the clash of steel, and shouted orders. Amid the chaos, Torin Vex stood at the ready, his broad frame silhouetted against the fiery backdrop. Scarred and unwavering, he barked commands to the security teams, his rifle spitting deadly bursts at boarding parties attempting to breach the decks. The first wave of pirates slammed against the expedition's defenses, sparks flying as blades met metal, and cries of pain mingled with battle cries. Torin's voice rose above the melee, a rallying call that steadied the nerves of even the most shaken crew members. Ilara's heart pounded as she monitored the shifting tides of battle. Her mind raced through star charts and tactical maps, calculating maneuvers to outwit their foes. "Yarick, take us through the canyon now," she ordered. The ship lurched sharply as Yarick twisted the helm, guiding them through a narrow passage between jagged, floating rocks. The walls closed in like the teeth of a beast, but the pirate ships were relentless, engines howling as they pursued with deadly intent. The air grew thick with tension and the scent of burning fuel. Elara's breath came fast, but she maintained a calm exterior, knowing that panic would be contagious. "Keep your focus," she urged the crew over the comms. "We survive this, or we don't survive at all." As they pushed deeper into the canyon, Mira's voice crackled through the cums. "I've rerouted power to the star cannons, ready to fire on your command." Elara hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Fire when ready." A thunderous volley erupted, the star cannons blazing with brilliant light. The enemy ships faltered, caught in the unexpected crossfire. Explosions bloomed across the sky, sending shards of twisted metal raining down like deadly hail. Yarek's face broke into a grim smile. "That's the kind of fire I like." But the battle was far from over. Kale's flagship, imposing and relentless, pressed forward with renewed fury. Elara knew this confrontation was the crucible that would define their fate. As the skirmish raged, Elara caught a glimpse of something deeper in the conflict beyond the tactical maneuvers and fiery exchanges. She saw the fierce loyalty in Tauren's steadfast defense, the spark of hope in Myra's determined hands, even the reluctant trust slowly building between herself and Yarek. Amid the fires in the sky, the expedition was forging a fragile unity that might yet withstand the storm. But the cost was steep. Damage was mounting, casualties rising. The weight of leadership pressed heavy on Elara's shoulders, her mind haunted by the ghosts of past mistakes. Could she guide her crew through the tempest and secure the future of Skyfold? The next move would decide everything. "All hands, brace for boarding." Tauren's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. The enemy was close, too close. Elara squared her shoulders, ready to face whatever came next. "Hold the line," she murmured, "for Skyfold, for all of us." As the first boarding grapples latched onto the hull, the skies around them ignited with the fury of battle, a blazing testament to courage and desperation entwined. And somewhere in the storm, Captain Riven Kale watched, calculating his final play. The fires in the sky were far from extinguished. "Steady, steady," Yarek shouted as he wrestled the controls, weaving through jagged rock spires that threatened to rip their ship apart. The roar of pursuing engines thundered behind them, close enough to taste the desperation and fury on the wind. The scent of burnt gunpowder and scorching metal stung his nostrils. "I'm counting on you," Elara said, voice low but firm. "Hold us together." A sudden blast rocked the ship, throwing them off course. Alarms blared. A jagged tear appeared along the starboard hull. Sparks cascaded from exposed wiring, and the ship shuddered violently. "Damage report," Elara barked. "Hull breach in Sector 5, Mira replied, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Patching now, but it won't hold long without repairs." Gorick cursed under his breath, muscles taut as he fought the controls. "We can't outrun them forever. We need a plan." "We fight," Elara answered, eyes blazing with resolve. "All or nothing." The ship shuddered again as another volley struck. Through the haze of smoke and fire, Tauren's steady voice rang out, organizing the deck defenses. The clang of metal on metal, the shouts of combat, and the crackle of energy weapons filled the air. Elara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of every life aboard. "Ready the star cannons," she ordered. "When I give the word." Seconds stretched, each one a lifetime. Then, with a fierce cry, the first volley blazed forth, lighting the sky with burning trails. Explosions rocked the enemy fleet, scattering ships and buying precious moments. "Keep pushing," Yarek urged, adrenaline surging. Amid the chaos, Elara's thoughts flickered to the faces of her crew. One, a story, a hope, a future she was determined to protect. The battle was far from over, but in this crucible of fire and sky, they had found their strength. And the skies of Skyfold would never be the same again, Elara incoming from starboard. Lena Oris's urgent voice crackled through the comlink. Elara pivoted, eyes narrowing as she spotted a sleek enemy fighter breaking through the clouds, weapons blazing. Evasive maneuvers, she shouted. Yarrick twisted the helm sharply, the ship banking hard as the enemy's salvo streaked past, tearing a gash through the aft sail. That was too close, Yarrick muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. We can't afford close calls, Elara replied grimly. Prepare counterattack. Below decks, Mira's hands flew over instruments, rerouting power to shields and weapons. The hum of the ancient engine surged with renewed vigor. Power levels stabilizing, she reported, but we're running on reserves. Torin's squad repelled another boarding attempt, his fierce commands echoing over the rumble of combat. Blood and sweat streaked his face as he fought with grim determination. Elara's gaze swept over the battle-worn faces of her crew. Despite exhaustion and fear, their resolve burned bright. Hold fast, she whispered to herself. This is our fight. The fires in the sky raged on, but so did the unyielding spirit of those who dared to chart the unknown. And in the heart of the storm, Elara Voss stood unbroken, a beacon of hope against the encroaching darkness. As the last embers of the skirmish faded into the drifting clouds, the fleet limped toward a tenuous sanctuary among the floating isles. Damage was extensive, losses were felt deeply, but the spirit of the expedition endured, tempered like steel forged in fire. Elara stood on the deck, eyes fixed on the horizon where dawn threatened to break the storm. The battle had tested her in ways she had feared, but it had also revealed her strength and that of her crew. Jarek approached, his usual bravado softened by exhaustion. Not bad for a disgraced navigator, he said with a half smile. Elara returned the smile, fragile but genuine, not bad at all. The fires in the sky had not been extinguished, and neither had the fight for Skyfold's future. But together, amid the shifting clouds and shifting borders, they would face whatever came next. For the skies belonged to those brave enough to claim them, and Elara Voss was ready to lead them there. The storm outside was relentless, a swirling mass of grey and black that cloaked the floating continent of Skyfold in a veil of uncertainty. Inside, the world was still, save for the slow, steady rhythm of Elara's breath and the occasional creak of the ship's timbers adjusting to the turbulent air currents. Her fingers traced the delicate lines of an old star chart spread across the table before her. The parchment was yellowed with age, edges frayed, and the ink faded in places. But to Elara, it was a lifeline and echo of a time when her skill as a navigator had been unmatched, when the stars had seemed to guide her with unwavering certainty. Now, that certainty felt like a distant memory, buried beneath layers of regret and self-doubt. A shadow fell across the map, and Elara looked up to see Yarrick Thorne stepping into the cabin. His tall, rugged frame filled the doorway, the scar over his left eye catching the lantern light. Despite the tension that often crackled between them, his gaze was softer than usual. "You're still here," he said quietly, closing the door behind him. "Storm's too fierce to be out flying." Elara forced a smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. Some things don't wait for clear skies. Yarrick moved closer, leaning against the table. "You've been quiet since we left the last port." She hesitated, then nodded. "There's a weight I carry, Yarrick, one that's been with me since before this expedition began." He was silent, waiting. Her mind drifted back to that fateful mission, her last expedition before disgrace had forced her from her post. The memory struck like a sudden gale, vivid and relentless. The airship had been caught in a violent storm, the currents shifting like living things. Her calculations had faltered. A misread star, a fraction of a degree off, and the ship had plummeted toward the jagged rocks of a lost skyland. The screams of the crew, the crack of splintering wood, and the crushing weight of failure pressed down on her then as they did now. "I lost them," she whispered, eyes fixed on a darkened corner of the cabin. "My mistake cost lives." Sharek's expression softened, the usual bravado replaced by something more genuine. "You carry that with you, but it doesn't have to define you." Before she could respond, the soft chime of the communication console interrupted them. Myra Solan's voice crackled through, calm and steady over the static. "Elara, I've been analyzing the data from the last scan. There's something you need to see." The scholar's presence always brought a sense of clarity, a reminder of the mission's greater purpose. Elara rose, smoothing her worn coat as she followed Yorick toward the bridge. Myra stood over the glowing console, her silver hair catching the light like strands of moonbeam. Her slender fingers danced over the controls, revealing images of ancient Skyland technology buried beneath layers of cloud and time. The artifacts shimmered on the display, complex mechanisms that hinted at power beyond their understanding. "This changes everything," Mira said softly. "If we can unlock even a fraction of this technology, the balance of power in Skyfold could shift dramatically." Elira's gaze hardened with renewed determination. "Then we have no choice but to succeed." The storm raged outside, but inside, a quiet resolve settled over the crew. The past whispered its doubts, but Elara was learning to listen without being consumed. The skies were still treacherous, the dangers real, but for the first time in a long while, hope felt tangible. As the ship sailed onward into the unknown, Elara Voss embraced the weight of her history not as a shackle, but as the foundation upon which she would build her redemption. And the campaign was far from over. From the deck of the flagship, Elara Voss surveyed the sprawling fleet anchored near the contested borderlands, her sharp eyes tracing the jagged edges where claimed airspace blurred into unclaimed skies. The golden light of a late afternoon sun filtered through the drifting mists, casting elongated shadows that seemed to reach for the shifting horizon. The hum of engines and the soft creak of rigging filled the air, underscored by the distant crackle of radio transmissions, a reminder that beneath this fragile calm, tensions simmered perilously close to boiling. Elara's fingers curled tightly around the railing as she absorbed the weight of responsibility resting on her shoulders. The reclaimed Skylands were more than just territory. They were symbols of hope, redemption, and the promise of a new order amid the chaos of Skyfold's lawless frontiers. But the shifting borders invited equally shifting dangers. Rival factions lurked in the periphery, their ambitions cloaked in diplomacy but sharpened by unspoken threats. Inside the flagship's war room, a cramped space lined with aged maps and humming instruments, Mira Solan adjusted her spectacles, her slender fingers tracing the ancient boundary lines that had once defined Skyfold's fragmented territories. "These borders," Mira murmured, "are more fluid than we anticipated. The current shift not just the islands, but the claims upon them." Torin Vex stood sentinel by the door, his broad shoulders tense beneath the dim light, blue eyes piercing the gloom for any sign of intrusion. His gruff voice broke the heavy silence. "We can't hold these lands with diplomacy alone. We need strength and readiness." Yorick Thorne leaned forward over the table, his sun-bleached hair falling into his eyes, the scar above his left eye twitching as he spoke. "Strength without alliances is a suicide pact. We need to play this smart. Let them see we're willing to parley but ready to fight." Elara nodded, absorbing their counsel. Her own doubts gnawed at the edges of her resolve, but she understood that leadership demanded a careful balance between caution and decisiveness. "We'll open communications with the rival factions. Let them know we respect their claims where they are legitimate, but we won't back down on what we've reclaimed." As the fleet maintained cautious patrols, Lena Oris worked tirelessly at the communications hub. Her slender fingers danced across the controls of a complex array of signal interceptors, filtering through the static and chatter that filled the ether. Suddenly, a series of encrypted transmissions caught her attention. Her eyes narrowed as she decoded the concealed Massager, covert maneuver planned by a rival faction intended to challenge the expedition's claim at dawn. "Elara," Lena's voice crackled through the comms. "I've intercepted a transmission. They're planning a move to seize the eastern Skyland under cover of fog." Elara's heart thudded with a mixture of adrenaline and calculated resolve. "Prepare a response. We can't afford a surprise attack. Alert Yarrick and Torin. We'll need to be ready to counter." The airship fleet shifted with urgency, engines roaring to life as crews scrambled to their stations. Below decks, Elara gathered her core leadership team, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of the navigational charts. "This is the moment we've been preparing for," Elara began, her voice steady despite the tension. "Our position is precarious, but if we act with unity and resolve, we can solidify our hold and send a message that Skyfold's skies belong to those who dare to claim them." The following hours were a blur of strategic maneuvers, intercepted signals, and tense negotiations. Despite the looming threat of open conflict, Elara sought diplomatic channels to de-escalate the situation. Under her guidance, emissaries were dispatched to meet rival leaders aboard a neutral skyship tethered between the contested zones. The parley took place at dusk, beneath swirling twilight skies that mirrored the uncertainty hanging over the meeting. Lanterns cast a soft glow over faces etched with suspicion, resolve, and the weary fatigue of endless conflict. Elara met the eyes of her counterparts, her own gaze steady and unyielding. "We stand at a crossroads," she began, voice clear and resonant. "The skies are vast, but our ambitions must be tempered by mutual respect. Let us set clear boundaries and honor those lines to avoid needless bloodshed." The rival leaders exchanged guarded glances, their responses measured but tinged with the unspoken calculus of power. Agreements were tentative, concessions grudging, yet the fragile accord marked a crucial step away from open warfare. As the meeting adjourned and the fleet settled into uneasy watchfulness under the darkening skies, Elara allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The path ahead remained uncertain, fraught with political intrigue and the ever-present threat of betrayal. Yet amid the swirling clouds and shifting borders, a glimmer of hope endured, a hope born of resilience, courage, and the unyielding desire to reclaim not only lost skylands, but lost honor. "We hold the line," Elara whispered to herself, and with it, the future of Skyfold. But as the stars began to pierce the velvet night, a distant rumble echoed across the sky, reminder that in Skyfold, peace was as fleeting as the clouds themselves. The tension in the air was palpable as the expedition's fleet maneuvered cautiously through the contested skies. Every shift in wind and every crackle in the radio waves carried the weight of potential conflict. Elara's mind raced, balancing the immediate need to protect her crew with the longer game of securing lasting peace. Garrick approached her on the deck, his expression unreadable beneath the flickering lantern light. "You think they'll hold to their word?" Elara met his gaze, the fire of determination reflected in her own tired eyes. "They want to avoid war as much as we do. For now, But we can't rely on words alone. We need to be ready always. Torrent's voice cut through the quiet as he joined them, his broad frame silhouetted against the darkening sky. Then we keep watch. We protect what we've earned. No surprises, no mistakes. The three leaders stood together, a united front against the uncertain horizon. Below, the fleet's lights twinkled like distant stars, a testament to the fragile alliance forged amid shifting lines in the clouds. As the night deepened, Elara felt the weight of the campaign settle upon her shoulders anew. The lines drawn in Skyfold's skies were more than territorial markers. They were the boundaries of trust, power, and the future itself. And she, once a fallen star, now bore the responsibility to hold them steady against the gathering storm. The dawn would bring new challenges, but for now, amidst the drifting clouds and whispered promises, the expedition held the line, and that was enough. Elara Mira's voice came softly from the navigation room. "There's something you need to see." Following Mira, Elara stepped into the dim glow of the illuminated maps. Ancient boundary lines flickered alongside real-time data of the shifting ski lands. "The currents have shifted more than we anticipated," Mira explained, pointing to a cluster of islands drifting unpredictably near the contested zone. "If they continue like this," Mira continued, "our current agreements might become obsolete within days. We need to anticipate these changes and respond swiftly." Elara's jaw tightened. The very nature of Skyfold's floating lands meant the campaign was a moving target. Territory claimed today could be lost tomorrow to shifting winds and political tides. "Then we adapt," Elara said firmly. "We'll update our maps, adjust our patrols, and strengthen our diplomatic efforts. No matter how the lines in the clouds shift, our resolve will remain unbroken." Outside, the first light of dawn painted the sky in hues of amber and rose. The expedition was far from victory, but with every careful step, Elara and her crew carved a path forward, a path through uncertainty, danger, and the ever-changing skies of Skyfold. The campaign was far from over, and the skies held their breath.